Coming up on Network Africa. Building collapse in Cairo kills 8, including 7 members of one family. Sudan's Rapid Support Forces takes control of South Darfur town. Plus, death toll from Kenya cult investigation rises to more than 400. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Joke Rogers here in Lagos. We begin with sad news where 8 people, including 7 members of one family, have been killed when a residential building in Egypt's capital, Cairo, collapsed. According to a statement from the public prosecution, civil defense workers pulled out 9 people, among them an injured woman, while the 8 others were deceased, adding that another 5 were able to leave the property before it fell down. The statement adds that the injured woman and 2 residents gave testimony suggesting that the collapse was caused by a resident who recently knocked down walls in his first-floor flat, despite neighbors asking him not to do so. The prosecution ordered the arrest of the building's owner, the contractor in charge of the works, and one of his employees for questioning. A large portion of the buildings in central Cairo date back to the 19th and early 20th centuries, and many are dilapidated or in some cases have been completely abandoned. Joining me now for more is Edward Uranian, VOA's correspondent in Cairo. Good to see you today, Edward.
My pleasure, Joka.
So what more can you tell us regarding the building collapse? Is the death toll expected to rise? What are you hearing at this time?
Well, the government media has kept a lower figure than we're seeing on some of the Arab news channels, but the latest I've seen on the Arab news channels, which are usually more accurate, is that 13 people were killed. Now, I've seen numbers change, and I've seen wrong numbers put out because top officials put them out themselves and didn't want to change them. So it's really difficult to judge, but I suspect it's more likely to be 13 than to be 8. And we've already had, they say, 3 building collapses within the last 5 days, and there was a bad one about a month ago in Alexandria. Of course, in terms of the buildings themselves, this particular building dates back to 1980, according to the Egyptian media, not to the 19th century. And if you look at some of the 19th century buildings, which have dirty and crumbling facades, they're actually more sturdy than some of these newer buildings. So it's not always a question of age.
So we could say, you know, as you've just reported there, that was it as a result of negligence on the part of the person that was doing some kind of renovation in the building? Or what have they been able to attribute this to?
Negligence, I guess that's a good word. Carelessness. I mean, it's criminal when you pull out walls from your first floor apartment and you know you're structurally damaging the building. Certainly other residents seem to have known that because they reported it to the police. Part of the problem, I think, is you have some corrupt officials that are paid off when things like this are done against the law. But one of the Egyptian newspaper correspondents was reporting on one of the Arab news channels that this building has not been in compliance since 1992, and that there was an order to have it structurally modified since 1992. Now that's 30 years ago, and there was an earthquake 30 years ago, so it's probable that the building was structurally damaged in the earthquake, and that goes back quite a long way, in addition to the fact that the owner of the first floor apartment was structurally damaging the building by removing walls.
Is this the first of its kind in Cairo? Well, not, the collapse of buildings. That sometimes happens in communities and countries. But is this the first of its kind that someone will be, trying to make renovations to a building and then it caves in on people living there?
Not at all. I've been here in Cairo for 15 years, and I've been covering Egypt for longer than that. And there's never a month that goes by where you don't see a building that collapses. But of course, the death toll isn't usually this high, and you don't usually see that many people in the rubble, because most people in a building like that know that it's structurally damaged, then they leave before it collapses. Of course, as I said, the last few days, last week, we've had 3 buildings collapse in the areas, well, not necessarily Cairo. I think one was in Bahira to the north of the country, and another one apparently was in Cairo, actually, and then a month ago in Alexandria. So it's all over the place. And I think part of the problem is, in addition to corrupt officials who look the other way when building owners or apartment owners change the structure of the building, you have the fact that they're overwhelmed with all these structurally damaged buildings, and they really wouldn't be able to inspect all of them anyway. And when people pointed out their staff is not capable to go out and investigate these things very quickly anyway.
And I was going to talk about investigations. You said there's a raft of building collapses. One happened a month ago, several before that. So how have investigations been conducted into these collapsed buildings by the authorities involved?
Well, this is quickly risen to the ministerial level, to the government level. The minister is now involved in this, and he's sending out directives because he's getting a lot of pressure from the public, angry about building collapses, to do something. But part of the problem is that they're going to take people, according to some of the complaints I've heard in the Egyptian media, that many people will be asked to leave buildings that they deem to be structurally unsound, and these people have no place to go, and it's perhaps unlikely that some of them will collapse. It's just that they're taking preventive measures to appear to be doing something. So there are a lot of issues here that need to be examined, and certainly the government is trying to be active or proactive now that there's a large public outcry against building collapses.
Right. Edward, thank you for your time today and for that update.
My pleasure, Joka.
We're now in Sudan, where the paramilitary force fighting against the Sudanese army has taken control of a town in South Darfur, with further reports of human rights abuses. Clashes between the rapid support forces and the army have forced several thousand families to flee the town of Kas. There are reports of RSF fighters looting or destroying government buildings and markets. Since the war broke out in mid-April, non-Arab communities across Darfur have been targeted by the RSF and allied Arab militias. A similar pattern of ethnic violence took place 2 decades ago when militias were deployed to crush a rebellion. That war left around 300,000 people dead. Meanwhile, clashes between the Sudanese armed forces and the paramilitary rapid support forces continued in the capital, Khartoum, and its surrounding areas as regional and international mediation efforts continue to find a way to end the conflict. The fighting mainly broke out in the city of Omdurman, where RSF's one major supply base and the SAF's Air Force base are located. The SAF launched airstrikes against RSF targets, while the RSF conducted counterattacks with anti-aircraft artillery and unmanned drones. But according to the Sudanese army, the RSF had suffered a setback and withdrawn from parts of Omdurman. Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, chairman of the Sudan Sovereign Council and commander-in-chief of the Sudanese army, says the SAF will stop all military operations as long as RSF withdraws from the government bodies, civil infrastructure, and private houses it occupied. In the meantime, a Sudanese family that fled fighting in South Darfur's capital of Nyala said they nearly escaped death as missiles and fighting hit their neighborhood. Forced to flee the violence, Goma Ahmed, her daughter and her son escaped to the relatively calmer East Darfur city of Al El Dain. Her neighborhood in Nyala's Al Jabal district was heavily targeted with missiles, and many of her neighbors were killed. The family hopes they can go back to their home soon, but the mother says she was worried as looting of properties continue. The war that erupted between the army and the RSF in the capital, Khartoum, has led to a surge of ethnically charged violence and displacement in Darfur, the RSF's power base, and a region already suffering from long-running conflict. And the conflict between the military factions in Sudan is taking a hard toll on farmers as production of staple crops this year is at risk, threatening to drive the African nation deeper into hunger and poverty. The worsening conditions for farmers suggest a looming hunger crisis could be even worse than the UN and aid workers have forecast. In May, the United Nations said it estimated that the number of people going hungry in Sudan would rise to 19.1 million by August. That's from 16.2 million prior to the conflict, which started in April. According to the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, the FAO, nearly 65% of Sudan's population of 49 million is engaged in the agricultural sector.
At around 19 million people in Sudan that are facing hunger. Right now is actually what would traditionally be the lean season in Sudan. So from June to September is what we call the hunger season because it's the planting season. So farmers and people have harvested the crops from the previous season, and so there is typically less of food available in this season. So we're looking at around 40% of the population that would not know where their next meal is coming from. And this is across the country, but the most affected areas are in West Darfur, South Kordofan, West Kordofan, and especially as we're seeing the conflict continue to escalate in the Darfurs, and it's extremely difficult to access, whether for humanitarian assistance and or for traders. These are the areas of most concern.
Current agricultural season is the most important for Sudan, where the major staple crops, sorghum and millet are produced. And you will also know that the big commercial farmers will be responsible for producing around 50 to 60% of the sorghum and millet. And in those big commercial farming land, the preparation of land has been delayed. They couldn't even prepare to clean the irrigation channels and all in a way that they can get ready to farm. And I'm also fearing that they'll be having a lot of problem to have access to fuel, fertilizers, and in a way that they can plant on time. So in those big commercial lands, the farming has been delayed.
Welcome back to the program. Away from Sudan, police investigating a doomsday cult in Kenya have now exhumed 403 bodies from the Shakahola forest after 12 more bodies were found yesterday. Hundreds of people linked to the Good News International Church are believed to have either starved themselves to death, they were badly beaten, or strangled by the Shakahola forest in southeastern Kenya. The court leader, Paul Mackenzie, preached that the world was about to end and allegedly convinced his followers to starve to death so they could see Jesus. However, Mr. Mackenzie has not yet been formally charged with this. Kenyan journalist Cyrus Ombati joins me now for more. Hello, Cyrus. Right, so
Hello,
12,
you there? You fine?
yeah, so 12 more bodies have been exhumed, bringing the death toll to over 400. What more can you tell us regarding this gruesome discovery?
Actually, they have exhumed today 16 more, bringing the number to 419 bodies. This in last year around December there, when most members joined this group. They have been there for long, but now that's when it started becoming more prominent in the area. This man who was behind the whole thing, Mr. Paul Mackenzie, was arrested sometime in February this year, but then he was released by the court on bond. So this is time then up to June there, that's when it was discovered.
And will there be more exhumations apart from the one you just reported like a couple of seconds ago? What are the investigators saying as regards the probe so far?
They're saying there are 40 more sites, that's grave sites. And each of these graves could be having up to 5 bodies. So we're anticipating around 200 more bodies. They're saying, most of those people who are being buried there or kind of people coming from the same family. So you find that one family had 5 people, they could be killed and be buried in one grave. So these 4 more grave sites, these are what now police are focusing on so that they can now be able to exhume the more bodies from there. And now after that exhumation of around 200 bodies, we'll now go again for another exercise of post-mortem, which will take another 2 weeks again to complete. Again, we go another process of when the 5th round of exhumation. People are anticipating of about 1,000 bodies from the area, according to those who are participating in the whole exercise of killing people. So we are expecting more bodies to be exhumed, exhumed from the area.
Right, and many wonder, almost 3 months into this terrible act, why has the cult leader, Paul Mackenzie, not been formally charged even up till now?
The problem is that police will not be able to find what we can call witness who can be able to say, yes, I was. We have 4 or 5 people who can say they are witnesses who are killing people there under the instruction of Mr. Mackenzie. But now the evidence which has been acquired or rather adduced by police is not that strong to be able to sustain that murder case from in court. That's why even Mr. Mackenzie keeps on making application report to be released on bond. The police now keep also making application reports because extend their time to hold Mr. Mackenzie in custody. So it's a kind of a cat and mouse game until the time now all the bodies are completed in terms of exhumation, and then we have a postmortem report to be able to tell us, for example, body A, B, C, how did they die? Body C, B, D, or how did they die? So that can be, it can now make a basis of now charging Mr. Mackenzie, for example, with murder or any other crime that can be linked to him.
Right, Cyrus, thank you for that update.
Thank you so much.
Let's move on. The Democratic Republic of Congo is presenting the highest number of conflict-related sexual violence cases, with 701 verified violations. This is according to the UN Secretary General's Special Representative on Sexual Violence and Conflict, Pramila Patten, who says gang rape, sexual slavery, and other forms of sexual violence are being used as a tactic of war, torture, and terrorism to subjugate and displace populations. She was briefing the UN Security Council members.
Rising militarization and arms proliferation are bringing conflicts across the globe to boiling point, creating the conditions for unimaginable and unrelenting cruelty. Gang rape, sexual slavery, and other forms of sexual violence are being used as a tactic of war, torture, and terrorism to subjugate and displace populations. UN humanitarian service providers reported more than 38,000 cases of sexual and gender-based violence in 2022 in North Kivu alone, including alarming levels of sexual exploitation of children at more than 1,000 sites in and around displacement camps. Against this backdrop, I felt compelled to visit the DRC in June to assess the situation firsthand. I was horrified by the testimonies I heard from women and girls, many of whom had been very recently raped or gang raped and were still receiving treatment.
When we cast an eye around the world, whether we're looking at the DRC, where I visited in November, Ukraine, Myanmar, Sudan, and indeed many other places of the world, we continue to see the use of conflict-related sexual violence as a real weaponization of war. It's wrought upon many survivors of conflict, survivors who hope that they've survived the worst of their ordeals and then are violated in a most abhorrent way.
25 countries halved multidimensional poverty within 15 years, but 1.1 billion remain poor, according to the 2023 Global Multidimensional Poverty Index released this month. The report compiles data from 110 developing countries, covering 6.1 billion people and accounting for 92% of the population in developing countries. Director, Human Development Report Office, United Nations Development Programme, Pedro Conceição, and others were speaking on the sidelines of the political forum.
So one reason is if you think about giving cash to a household, to a family that moves this family above an income poverty line, that does not mean that this family has access to electricity, to a water main, or children in that household go to school. So multidimensional poverty captures these other aspects that are not accounted for in a monetary measure of poverty. So it calls attention to the importance, for instance, of investment in infrastructure or public goods more generally.
The MPI is a key resource that will assist us in undertaking informed policy decisions and addressing poverty-related issues for developing countries.
Using the MPI lens, we are seeing how 1.1 billion people worldwide are living in this multidimensional poverty. We can also better understand where poverty is located, including within countries. Crucially, the MPI can inform targeted policies, given its much broader analysis of how poverty affects people.
High-level results. Across these 110 countries, we measured this year 1.1 billion people are multidimensionally poor around the world. This represents 18% of the population of these 110 countries. In terms of the composition, we see that around half of the poor people are children below 18 years of age.
And we end the program now. Former Nigerian President Chief Olusegun Obasanjo has been reacting to the recent declaration of a national emergency on food security by President Bola Tinubu as Nigerians grapple with record inflation, which has made basic food unaffordable for many. Speaking to Channels Television on the sidelines of a conference in Johannesburg, South Africa, the former president, who is a farmer himself, says Nigeria is not short of initiatives to keep food within the reach of the people. He says leadership deficits and a lack of continuity of policies are the major problems holding back progress.
If you go into Nigeria, that I know very well, if you go to the Ministry of Agriculture, you will find piles and piles of policy documents that over the years that are repeating virtually the same thing. So we are not short of ideas. We are short of continuity. We are short of leadership. Leadership deficit and continuity of policies. So a lot of policy somersault. Let me give you an example. When I was military head of state, we came up with Operation Feed the Nation. We wanted a Greek to be embraced, even if you are a housewife, you can do something in your backyard. If you are a student, you can do something in your school.
Well, that's the program today. Thank you for watching. I'm Joke Rogers.